But I just remember being alone and just being like, God, I don't even know, like, if you really care for me. And it just became this big panic of like, what if everything I'd ever thought of was totally wrong?
The other day, I was talking to my friend Jess, and she mentioned that there was a time in her life when she was doubting her faith. And I didn't even know that about her. So I wanted to sit down and hear about her journey through doubt back to a place of confident belief. Feel free to listen in. I guess like this is more on me than it is on you, but I was like, what? Jess had a time of doubt. Like Jess never seems like she could ever like have a doubt. So that
Right,
was
right.
like, I was just like, whoa.
So it's interesting because doubt can be categorized, right, in so many different things and what aspects you doubt of things. Um, Throughout my season, I never doubted that God existed or didn't exist. Like that wasn't the factor. So I was like, I know God is real. I know that he exists, but the doubt factor for me was what role he played in my personal life. And so it was like, is God really fully good? Like, does
Mm.
God really love me? Does God actually walk with us through seasons that we go through?
But you felt like year one of university was rough,
Yeah,
like
for
because of
sure.
the context that you were in, like the classes or the friends or.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of it was one of those things where kind of like when you have a situation where many different factors all kind of happen at the exact same time.
Hmm.
So like I was raised homeschooled, which is great. Was really close with my family, had some really great, like solid Christian friends, Michaela being one of them. So I kind of had that friend base. A lot of my friends were either older than me or younger than me, but the ones my own age all left to go to Bible college. So they kind of all left the city. My few friends that stayed, the same year that I went to college for the first year, was also the same year that my family transitioned going to a different church. So I lost kind of my church community at the same time that I was immersed in a completely different setting. So kind of lost friends, lost my church family and community, so like the support group I had, and then also was in a totally new environment, which because I took a very worldly secular program, it was like every question ever was like right in my face. It was the first week of being there. It was like, if you're a Christian or if you don't believe in these political values or whatever, they're like, you shouldn't be here. And so right away, I was like, oh my word, I started questioning everything. And so, yeah, that was kind of like everything just hit right at once to even from the first week in my program, I started feeling already kind of shaky with kind of where I was at. And then it was like myself versus the 120 other students that were in my program. So I felt like I was very alone.
What about your beliefs or your values did you feel like were basically just unwelcome? And what program were you in? Because
Yeah.
I don't know what you studied. Yeah. So what about that felt like what specifically felt
Mhm.
so challenged?
Right, right. Yeah, so kind of a few factors. There's the factors of what the program challenged and then what I put on myself too. So I studied child and youth work. So a very the basis of the program is to help students who are or sorry, not students, but like children and youth who are going through hard seasons in their life. So with that, a lot of the people that attracts to the program to actually complete the program and work in that field are people who are going through really hard seasons in their life. So they kind of feel like if they're walking through hard seasons, they can then pour into others, which then meant that pretty much every issue you can imagine under the sun then became issues that everyone was talking about and dealing with that were my classmates. So I quickly felt like I was already being a counselor to my classmates when I didn't even have any training yet. So right away, I felt like, okay, my perspective of where my hope comes from was the dead opposite of where everyone else's hope came from, which was very self-focused. So the program very much emphasized you can be the person who can get you through everything. And there's not really a wrong answer. So it was very like everything goes, choose whatever way you want, like the experiment however you choose to, but as long as you do what's best for you, that's kind of the center of what matters. Whereas I was here kind of being like, Jesus is the only way, like that's what I learned. And so my perspective was so countercultural to the idea of anything goes. Don't ever say your way is better than anyone else's. So it's kind of like opposite to everything I believed.
It's a really interesting nuance that you didn't doubt that God was there, but you did start to doubt whether
Mhm.
God was good.
Sure.
That's so interesting all on its own to me. Like I like, whoa,
Yeah.
what an interesting topic.
Yeah.
Um, like was that the core doubt? And did that come out of that perspective of like, no, you can help you and like,
Right. Right.
God if God is an answer, he's certainly not the only answer. Like you can find
Right.
help in all these different places. Like, so was what you were receiving in that program, is that what caused the question? Like, oh, but is God good?
Good question. So not so much that, it was more that that was what everyone else was viewing and talking about it and their side and perspective. And basically, if you didn't follow the train of thought that everyone was teaching, then you were a loner. And so very much so, because I thrive with people. Like my whole life is circled and cycled around people and being with people that you can grow with and walk with. And so because I felt completely isolated, and I spent a lot of time praying, like, God, like, would there just be one Christian in my program, like one person that I could connect with? And basically it took me until my last semester of third year to finally meet somebody who was another believer in my program. And so because of that, I was like, God, why would you put me in a program where I was completely alone? And I didn't feel like he was ever giving me the answer that I was looking for. And so that was the biggest question of why would God put me in, and so clearly direct me to that program too. I really wrestled with if it was the right one, but a lot of doors opened for it. So I was here feeling very, very, very different than everybody else, not feeling like I belonged. And so I was like, why is God so good and continually with me if that's what everyone says? But yet I was completely isolated and alone at the same time. So it was more that because everyone's views were so different and I felt so alone, then I questioned whether or not God was really who he says he was.
So you're saying there's almost these two different areas of doubt. One is that people are just kind of challenging your worldview.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then being alone in that
Yeah.
situation and feeling like maybe even a little abandoned by God, or like you don't have what you need, makes you
Mm,
question the goodness of God. So there's almost like two separate
sure.
things happening at the same time. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Wow. Okay. So like what did that rob you of? Like when you were
Yeah.
in the like let's say at the worst, which is not a happy place to go back to, but like at
Sure.
the bottom of this story arc,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
what in that worst place, what did those
Yeah.
questions and doubts rob you of?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I would say, like, I mean, ultimately robbed me of peace. Like, I realized very quickly that I was searching then not for peace in my walk with God anymore. Like, that was not the center thing I was looking for. Really quickly, it became about grades. So it's like the better grades. So it became a my success story, right? So it's all about myself then. So I was like, I don't feel like God's here with me. So then I'm just going to push myself as hard as I can. The more I pushed, the worse I did, which I found was very interesting looking back. But I felt that it robbed me of the peace that I felt like I had in high school. Like I never really felt like my boat was rocked very much before. And being rocked is a good thing, but I felt like I wasn't on solid ground at all. Like I just felt like it was kind of constantly trying to catch up. And going back to probably the worst situation was I just remember being at my family's house alone one time, and it was like late at night. So of course your thoughts are going 100 miles an hour. But I just remember being alone and just being like, God, I don't even know, like, if you really care for me. And it just became this big panic of like, what if everything I'd ever thought of was totally wrong? Like, I know that God's there because I can't sit there and discount that. Like, I knew he was still there, but what if he was not everything I ever thought he was? And so I suddenly had this panic, and like, I would studying panic attacks later on, realize I definitely had a panic attack in that moment. But it caused a lot of anxiety. Like I was stressed all the time, which caused stress in other areas such as schooling and friends and family. But it ultimately came from this unsettledness, from just not knowing where my sense of peace and purpose came from. Because I feel like that was suddenly rocked in that moment, which honestly bled through the entire first year of college. Like it was like the darkest year of my life for sure. There were even times where I'd be hanging out with friends and I think, okay, like I feel like I can, like that distraction idea, right? I'm like, I tried to then fill my time. So I was never by myself either. Because I knew my thoughts would just totally keep attacking me. And so I was like, great if I was with friends, but I can remember being with friends. I'll just name shout. I don't know if you can throw this in or not, but like Michaela, honestly, the
Yeah.
friend that like was with me through everything. But I
Hmm.
remember even being with her and talking with her, and she was the one of the few people I actually talked with during this journey because she was one of the few members I had that I could trust, and friends I still kind of had hanging around. But
Right.
even in those moments while talking with her, I can remember feeling the panic like rising back up when I'm like in a safe situation with someone else. We're totally removed from all the stresses, and it was still like constantly weighing on my heart. And it could just come back at any point, like at any point or any moment. So that was kind of what freaked me out the most, was that I had this like deep kind of fear around my doubts that just felt like it was always there, and it could come at any point. So
when we name those things, there are so many people who
Mhm.
feel that way right now. And
Yeah,
like they just need other like Christians to go, this is like a
for
real
sure.
feeling that happens. And they need someone to go,
Yeah,
like, this
yeah,
exists. And you
yeah,
can also actually journey through it in some real ways.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm in no way excited that you went through that, but like
yeah,
I am like, whoa, I'm like filled up by hearing you express
sure.
that because I just
Yeah,
believe it's so important for people to hear that.
yeah,
Okay. There's like the challenging your worldview thing, and that's like one piece of it, but it
right.
almost sounds, at least in the ways that you've expressed it here now, the bigger question almost became, God, where are you? Like, I thought you were good. I
Yeah,
thought you were going to be there for me.
for sure. It definitely like really came back to his character and nature. Like it was more focused on God and less focused on a certain theological issue. Like it was not on one little thing that kind of rocked my world. It was kind of everything encompassed, which all came back to, yeah, really, who is God and where is he? Like that. And it was never again a question of does he exist? And that's the thing that I found interesting is I always associated doubt with being you doubted that God exists, but really you can doubt who God is or doubt a character or an attribute of him as well, which can still rock your world in a totally different way. I was going to mention as well when you talked about how it's good to hear other people's experiences. For me, a huge piece of kind of I think naming first I was going through, and I talked to a few different people who were kind of like, oh, like it's just in your head, like kind of you'll walk through it. And I didn't really feel like a lot of people were pushing me to seek it out more. And so I remember hearing a testimony, couldn't tell you who it was. I have no idea. Some student in I can't tell which church it was at because I was young adult hopping at that moment. But I remember somebody telling their story of them walking through doubt and explaining in detail what that was like. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my goodness, that's what I'm going through. And someone else has experienced it and they've made it through. So that was huge for me knowing that it wasn't like this was it. Like I'm no longer like I'm a write off. It felt like this was actually something people walk through in their life. So hearing that was really essential to me actually trying to work through my faith at that point. Where if I hadn't kind of heard those stories of people who'd walked through doubt, I honestly could have just walked away and been like, that's it. It's not even worth going through this pain anymore. Might as well live with everybody else as well and just kind of go the way the world's going. So that was really essential to me.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. That's really powerful. I mean, like, kudos to that anonymous human being
Yeah.
who probably after that was like, was that even good? Did it even matter? And you're like,
Yeah.
I don't even know who you are, but that mattered so much to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so then, okay, so it sounds like they gave you kind of like hope that there is a way through.
Sure. Yeah.
What did it look like and to journey through? Like, was that a year's process, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so I would say so my program is 3 years long. I honestly would say it was a 3-year journey. Like every step of the way through those years was another crucial step along that process. The first year was definitely the most challenging and kind of like I would say like the dark season where there was not really a light at the end of that tunnel. But then kind of those testimonies and different things I was hearing from people that it was really weird too. It was a really God thing actually where it seemed to be a lot of things I was involved in then and that season, starting with that person's testimony, were people talking about their hard seasons. And so that kind of shaped some of my viewpoints. Following then after that, I applied to work. I don't know if you've heard of Fairhaven's Bible camp, which is
Yeah.
yeah, in like Aurelia area or whatever. So I just applied to work there. Funny enough, I had the application filled out on the website and I couldn't hit the apply button because I just could not like you basically had to write your whole testimony and you had to talk about how you'd seen God work in your life recently. I was like, I feel like I'm writing a lie. So I tried to explain, but I don't want to explain too much of my season of doubt because I felt like they wouldn't hire me. But I really felt like I was supposed to apply. And so I was really kind of stressed out about that. But then I chose to apply in the end. And that there was huge for me. I was able to completely remove myself from the surroundings where I was here in Ottawa for 4 months. And be the first 2 months is basically I was being trained and had like mentors and leaders just walk with me through things. And for the first time, I was really open with how I was walking through these things. And yet people didn't judge. Like they were really open to walking with you through hard seasons. And then through that was able to then minister to kids in the summer half of that. And I felt like pieces were just starting to come together at that point. So kind of the second year was kind of the next process of like walking through the fog a little bit. it was kind of that dark phase and then walking through the fog, and I was kind of picking the pieces up a little bit, and it was making a little bit more sense. And then come the third year was really when God was then pushing me to step out and actually start sharing my faith more with the friends that I had there. So it was like, okay, you're starting to trust me again. Now can you actually step forward and walk your faith out practically? And so it was kind of that 3-step journey. And that camp was huge. I went there for 3 years after each of the years of my program. And it was really neat to kind of see those being like those kind of transition years in between each year of the program. But it took, I would say, those 3 years to really walk completely out of that dark season. It was definitely not an overnight journey for me at all. So the first year was like that season of darkness where I felt like I couldn't see what was coming next. There wasn't really hope in the next section of the journey. But then the second year, it was like there was a bit of like a fog that was there that was being lifted. So I could have some visibility. I could see that God was working, and I was starting to grasp who he was again. And it's kind of that hope piece is back, like knowing where my hope was really founded in. So I kind of had that over the first year at camp. It reminded me again that God is present. So that was kind of that reminder of that. So step 2, second year, was walking through that fog. And then the third year was then God then saying, okay, so now that you're walking through this, you know who I am. Can you then take what you've been learning and can you actually walk out your faith daily? So I felt him really pushing me to start speaking up for my faith, actually telling people about who God is and starting to witness to people really was what I felt called to do in third year. So kind of from darkness to fog to walking in full light was kind of the 3 steps of the process.
And when you started, through the fog and started stepping out again, it sounds like you weren't totally like totally 100% feeling like you had fully kind of recovered to where you were before or whatever. But
Right.
it sounds like would that be the case where it's like you were kind of like tiptoeing onto the ice, for lack of a better illustration? Is that fair?
For sure, for sure. It was like not at all like a sudden thing where I was like, all right, let's go. Like it was very cautious for sure. But yet it's funny where the more I kind of started tiptoeing out, it was like the more energy I kept getting. So the momentum built fast. It just was a very slow start going back into that.
Right. And I mean, I think that makes sense. Like if faith can also be translated trust, then it's like our trust
Right.
grows, faith
For sure.
grows. Yeah. So, I mean, it makes sense to me that it's like you started in this place where it was like baby steps and then it grew in confidence.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, okay, I'd love to hear a little bit more of the nitty gritty. And I think
Yeah.
phase 2, when like
Yeah.
you're in this foggy area, like how
Yeah.
did you start to regain this understanding that God was good and that he was with you? Like
Yeah.
what were there, like, I don't know, did that look like apologetics? Did it look like praying? Did it look like a miraculous
Yeah.
experience? Like what
Yeah.
I don't know or care what it is, but like what helped you
Yeah.
go from I don't know if God is good and really cares to I'm
Mhm.
starting to believe that maybe he does? Because that's a
Right.
big step.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I don't know, maybe call it surface level, but definitely for me it's always been I've seen so much of who God is through the people of God, right? So through the body. And I think not being very connected to his church over the first year was what was really that darker season. But as I went into kind of that foggier phase there, I had a lot of people who listened. And I think that was huge for me, was knowing that seeing that all these wonderful, some older than me, some my age, some younger than me, would sit there and actually listen to what I was walking through, really felt like if people could care that deeply, it showed me how much God really cared. And so that's where, for me, I kind of, which it seems so funny because I'm like kind of went to the counseling field as well, but I didn't really realize how powerful listening really was. It didn't take people kind of teaching me and telling me the right way to walk through things. It really just took people sitting through, listening to me, and then through that kind of baby step pushing me to start reading my Bible again and start kind of discovering those things, which was really big for me because I read through the Bible, I'd done all those things before, but yet it was like, let's not check the boxes and just take your time, just cracking your Bible open and just spend time in prayer. That was the thing I really lacked actually was prayer, very much so. I always was like the Bible reading kind of person, but I wouldn't spend time actually seeking the Lord, bring my requests to him and really listening to him. So I think a big season for that for me was just stopping trying to make things work and just listening to people, listening to God, and really taking it slow. And I think those slow baby steps in, especially in prayer and kind of walking through mentorship process with others, that was kind of that slow start, knowing that I didn't have to sprint to make it work again. And I think that was my trouble at the very start of when the doubt kind of started, was that I kept thinking, oh my goodness, I can't be doubting. I have to make it go away now. So I kept trying so hard. I would like desperately try to read my Bible, desperately try to pray or whatever the situation was. But yet it was like God was reminding me, like, stop seeking out desperation, just like be present with me. And it was just those still kind of quiet moments that were the beginning of that, knowing that it wasn't about desperately trying.
Yeah, I mean, the illustration that's popping into my head is like, and I know nothing about being a lifeguard at all because I can't even pass my like level 6. Like I have the swimming qualifications of a 10-year-old, but it's kind of how they say, like, if you're drowning, it's like you can, like, if someone's trying to save you, you can actually be dangerous to them because you can be like,
Yeah,
you're just like so frantic that it's like you can't really receive anything. And it's almost so you just need to like stop
sure.
and like actually like be saved a little bit and like
Yeah,
actually just like receive. So it sounds like you were like, okay, I'm going to stop like doing all these things to try to just like fix the problem as fast as I
yeah,
can. And you're going to
yeah,
start like reading and praying in order to just genuinely try to
yeah.
encounter God.
It's actually funny because I'm a very busybody person. So for me, I'm a
Mm.
constant fixer. I need to have an answer right away. Even like people at the church, if you talk to them, it's like, just won't say no. Like I have to do everything and get it all done as fast as I can.
Mm.
So with that, I realized that naturally my walk with God, like I have my fists closed all the time. Kind of even now I've been walking through not doubt, but now like, okay, I've worked through the season of doubt years ago, but how can I make sure that doesn't come back again? And so it's been this process of how can I walk with hands open all the time and know that even holding your hands open to receive from the Lord can be tiring. And so saying, God, how can you hold my hands for me to receive from you? So it's been kind of this process of like letting go is really hard. And sometimes we desperately want to figure out the answers and we try everything we can in our own strength, but yet just letting go and spending time with the Lord is so essential. And it seems so easy and too easy that we often forget to do it.
How did you force yourself to embrace the risk of it? Right? Because you're kind of saying like I couldn't try to fix it because trying to fix it wasn't working. I had to like just
Right.
genuinely try to encounter God and accept that like this was going to take time and it wasn't necessarily going to
Right.
be quick and easy. Like um, it feels a little bit like, this is something that just dumb guys do. It's like you're gonna play a game and someone's gonna whip a ball at you, and you just have to like try not to flinch. Like it almost feels like
Right.
how do you choose to subject yourself to something that's going to be
Mm.
inherently uncomfortable? Like
Yeah.
so that because we're all obviously our natural reaction is like shield yourself from discomfort or pain or
Right.
anything that could like go wrong.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like you embraced a little bit of like, this is going to be uncomfortable and take some time.
Yeah.
What got you there? Because it seems to go against all our natural instincts.
To be totally honest, there was already so much I couldn't stand about how I was living already that anything was worth trying. So I was so low already in that point where I was like, I'm willing to pretty much give up anything to give it a chance. So because I'd hit that super ultra low moment, I was like, God, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. And I think it's kind of one of those things where once anyone hits that low, they're willing to try anything. And it just happened to be where I had wonderful people that directed me in the way to do that. But I think I was just ready to do it because I'd already hit such a low point. Whereas maybe if it had been like 6 months before, maybe that wouldn't have been the answer and it would have been harder. But I don't know if I could have changed where I was heading unless I'd hit that low point first.
Right. I mean, and maybe this is part of your education. It's like,
Mm.
sometimes it's certainly when it comes to like addictions, it's like
Yeah.
when the pain of not dealing with the addiction becomes
Yeah.
greater than the pain of dealing with it,
Yeah.
and most people deal with some kind of addiction. It's like
Right.
then you deal with it because the pain of dealing with it is actually less painful than the pain it's actually causing you. It
Yeah.
sounds like
Exactly.
that's okay. You said there were some people who were around who like really were able to help you do that, kind of like you, to use your language, open your hands and like try to encounter
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
How did they guide you? Like what was their wisdom and
yeah.
guidance?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So a big thing for me is I've always been a words person too. That's my love language, words of affirmation. And so a lot of people really encouraged journaling. Like that was a big thing. I loved writing, but I'd never been the person to kind of journal through studying the Bible or journal through praying. So a lot of people really encourage journaling, like write out how you're feeling, write out what you really want to say to the Lord, and then just spend time receiving from Him and listening to what He has to say to you. Kind of following that as well was a lot of people encouraged going out for walks. Because again, like that's something where you can't just fill in your time. Like if you're going out for a walk and you're disconnected, then you're on the full circuit of however long you're walking with just you and God. So that was really encouraging too. Being of course at a camp where it was out in the middle of nowhere, that's really easy to do as well because there's
Hmm.
a lot of places to walk around. But it was a lot of it was they were guiding kind of you to unplug was a big thing. And I think like technology was another distraction for me too. So knowing how to unplug was really crucial. And we actually did unplug challenges at camp where it was like go this many days or this many hours without touching your device. So I think unplugging and really like sounds so cheesy, but like unplugging for your device and plugging into God. But like really, it was really important for me.
I mean, yeah, maybe to say the unplug and plug. I mean, maybe that is like a little youth groupy cheesy, but it's like,
Yeah.
but it is true. It is
Yeah.
totally true that like, yeah, we are way too plugged into stuff. I
Mhm.
really find that to be hard too. Like just as a personal note, like I'm trying actively to like create more tech-free spaces in my life. And it's like really hard. Like it actually it took me like several weeks to like be able to not listen to a podcast while going for a walk, or to like not not use my phone while cooking, which is something I do every day,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yeah.
just like it took actually so much effort
Yeah,
to
for
just create a
sure.
little bit of brain space for me. And you'd think that like
Yeah.
while I'm cooking, why can't I just cook? But it's like I couldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really fascinating. Was there a definitive moment where felt like things kind of clicked back in a way of like, was there a moment in which things were helpful,
Right.
or was it really just a slow, gradual revelation and realization?
Right. Right. I would kind of, I would say more the slow gradual. If you think like you injure your arm doing a sport or something, and then like all of a sudden one day you realize, wow, how long has it not been hurting for? And you don't really notice exactly when that day was that it stopped being like that. That was kind of the same with me through my doubt journey. It was like this slow kind of work through this season. And then right after I graduated, I did camp one more year and then I went off to YWAM afterwards. Then I just remember going to YWAM being like, wow, that feels like it was so long ago that I was walking through that. And that had been at that point almost 4 years before that when I started that journey. And so it kind of felt like that I could almost say when it was, but at the same time, like I couldn't pinpoint a date. Like it was just yeah, I couldn't pinpoint a day where it was like, oh yeah, everything's kind of flipped back. Like it was really just a process for me.
Yeah, and maybe that's not a fair question in the
Mhm.
sense because I don't really believe that doubts bring us back to where we started. I believe that they
Sure.
actually like bring us somewhere new, which is
Right.
one of those other questions I wanted to ask you. Like
Yeah.
now on the other side of this multiple year
Yeah.
stressful, darkness, fog, light experience, like not how have your beliefs changed? Because in one sense, your beliefs kind of like, I believed God was good and now I believe God is good. But like, how
Right.
have you changed because
Yeah.
of that process?
Yeah. Yeah. Huge for me. Like number one has been vulnerability. Like for sure. I have always been a closed book. Like, why do people need to know what I'm walking through? It's not important. It's none of their business. So, which is funny going into a field of working with people who are really struggling. That was like kind of countercultural or what I would have been going into. But I still really felt like my own personal problems were mine to walk through. But going through that when there were so many low days where you couldn't really hide how bad things were going and people were going to see that you weren't doing well. Even though apparently, well, even like talking to you, I could hide it well enough that a lot of people didn't really catch on. But it really showed me how much more being open could seriously impact somebody else's journey. After hearing people who had struggled and that really impacted my journey, that was huge for me. It was all of a sudden like, how can any aspect of my story help anybody else in their walk with God? And which really brought me to gravitate towards youth ministry in the end. Which because at that point I was like, if even like a tiny snippet of my story can impact anybody, it's totally worth it. So yeah, it became this huge process of, instead of me walking my faith alone, it was how can I walk my faith openly with others and help encourage the body of Christ together. So I kind of understood, yeah, vulnerability was the big thing, and then the importance of community. Those were kind of the biggest things I took out of that.
Even though maybe like the doctrinal position, like what's written on the piece of paper, God is good, might not, those words might not change. Did your understanding of God's
Mhm.
goodness and presence like mature and deepen? Like, how did that
Yeah.
change through the process?
Yeah, for sure. His patience, like that was like, it was amazing to look back and know that God didn't change the whole way through. And it was me who went through the crazy cycles of up and down and all over the place, but yet he was steady. Like he was constantly steady through there and he didn't give up. That was huge for me. And I think I'd been through, like everyone goes through little ups and downs, like, oh, did bad on a test, like that kind of thing. But it never really felt like my world had been rocked yet. And for me, knowing that through 3 years of kind of going through different phases of working through doubt, coming out on the other side, it was like, God, I really understood how much more his patience and his faithfulness really was to me, because I could actually experience that going through there, knowing that even though in a sense it was like he's still the same, but I never really understood how deep that character of who he is really was beforehand. So I got to see that in a more raw and real way coming out the other side.
That's beautiful because I think, I see my own life and like when I'm misunderstood, certainly if I'm misunderstood for my awesomeness or goodness, like I take it very personally, right? If I think I did awesome at something and someone says it sucks, like I take
Right.
great offense to that. And it's like God in his goodness, we like call it into question. And yet he
Mhm.
doesn't respond out of insecurity like we do. Like it sounds, you're
Yeah.
saying like, despite all that, he's so patient,
Yeah.
patient to like help us receive it. Like it
Yeah.
actually just like cycles back and like just only amplifies how good he is.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
you
It's
don't get how good I am. It's okay. We'll get there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is so true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's inspiring. If you were able to be a guiding voice on someone else's journey,
Mm,
what would like who is experiencing something similar? Like, where is God? Is God good? What would you
yeah.
say to them? How would you try to guide them?
Oh, man, so much pressure. Oh man, first I have to like walk with them and hear exactly where they're at. But yeah, I think uh I think the biggest thing honestly is just really knowing that not just say you're not alone in a sense of that God's still with you, but you're not alone in your journey. There are so many more people than everyone understands who are walking through doubt. And it might look different for everyone, but I feel like everyone at some season of their life goes through some ounce of doubt, whatever it looks like. It is so prevalent because we're all humans and we all struggle with believing in things or struggle with having full commitment to things and seeing the full picture, right? If life is only just one little picture of what we're going to really see, we all experience different pieces of that. And so I think my first and biggest thing I would really emphasize is that you're not the only one who's walking through this. And the likelihood is if you're looking to the person on your left or the person on your right, they've experienced or they're going to experience doubt in maybe the same way, maybe a completely different way, but everyone's going to walk through it at some point in their life. Because I really think doubt is a piece of our refining process of who God creates us to be. So I think that would be the biggest thing is really emphasizing that you're not alone in this journey. Because that's how I really felt was I felt very alone.
I think what your story really underlines are some beautiful ways, like in the language of truth snack, ways of being an adventurous truth seeker, right?
Mm,
It's like
yeah,
you embraced that this is going to like take time. You embraced that it's going to be uncomfortable. You embraced that you needed guides, and all those are features of adventures, right? It's like you don't know the
right.
destination, there is a risk, you're going to encounter like you're going to need Gandalfs on the way, but you're also going to like encounter dragons on the way, and it's like, and then when you return, you're going to be different than you were
Yeah,
before. So like I think your story like really highlights that, which
mm,
so many people need to hear, that like that is a real
yeah,
thing, that people go
yeah,
through that and come or journey through it forward to like into confident belief in like a new way, having
Mm,
gone through the darkness and the mist and the light. So
yeah.
that's really cool. The last
Mhm.
thing I would just ask you is like, is there
Yeah.
anything more that you wanted to share that you didn't feel like you
Yeah.
got to share? Like, is there anything else on your heart that you're like, I just never got to say that one thing?
Yeah, actually, I'll just end with sharing a really neat story. I always talk to our students about how life is like an iceberg, right? Like if you think of the Titanic, right? They can see a little tip of the iceberg, but the base of it was what they didn't see. And so in our lives, we often just see the tip of the iceberg, and yet one day, Lord willing, we get to see the rest of it. Maybe that's just when we get to heaven. And so we never really know exactly what our story and what our journey will impact on other people. But throughout that season of those 3 years, kind of encountering different people on the way who were either wrestling with their faith or who were not believers themselves. Coming out at the other end of that would have been just after I graduated from my 3rd year. And I believe it might have even been just after coming back from YWAM. But I got 2 separate messages from one person who was someone who was formerly Muslim who was seeking out Christianity and came to our summer camp. And they had been kind of wrestling through their faith journey. And just kind of God was guiding them in different ways. And I was able to have multiple hour-long conversations with them, which was really neat. And they sent me a message and just explained that they had come to Christ. And I was sharing my journey of doubt and kind of talking about my story with them. And now she has gone on to be a huge witness in many churches. She's now a missionary herself. It's been really cool to see that. And even though I was just one little tiny piece in her journey, it felt like God was able to use a piece of my story in that. And the other one was one of my classmates who ended up dropping out of the program, and I hadn't heard from them in probably a year and a half or so. And then they sent me a message. I didn't even know we were friends on Facebook, to be honest. And they contacted me and told me they got baptized and they'd accepted Christ, and they were getting involved in serving in their church. And they were like, I still remember that you kind of started that spark in my mind about Christianity. And they went to kind of go seek it out on their own time. And so through that, they met Christ and had a life changing experience just because the very kind of first interaction and kind of tug they'd had in the direction of experiencing their own faith journey was hearing a little bit about my story in school. So from that, it was like, and that was actually during kind of that foggy stage where I was really not really sure where God was calling me. I had just a few conversations with friends about my faith. And that one little conversation stuck obviously in his life and totally changed his life. So I think that was really big for me, was seeing that 2 people were impacted even during the time where I wasn't really doing great either. So it was really neat. I feel like God blessed me with seeing a little bit of that extra piece of that iceberg in those 2 situations.
That's really encouraging. And it just kind of shows that like adventurous truth seeking journeys are like we're all on them and we find each other on the path in like these small weird
Yeah.
intersections as we're slashing through the woods. It's
Yeah.
like, oh hi, how are you? I'm going this way, you want to
Yeah.
come? And
Yeah.
just
It
kind of
was
like
really neat.
that
Yeah.
is really interesting. To clarify one thing, are you saying that while you were kind of in that foggy place of like having these doubts,
Yeah.
you expressed those doubts to a Muslim friend who was like considering Christianity in that time?
Yes, and there's a huge story there. Separately, I could probably share you some links of her story at some point too.
Yeah,
But yeah, so she was really doubting. For her, it was like Islam or Christianity. Like it was like a
right.
huge debate for her.
Hmm.
And so I was able to talk about my journey and kind of how I'd gone through and understanding who God was, but how I was still really wrestling with it. That was my
Right.
first year at camp, and so I wasn't out of the woods yet at that point. And then it was years later, she had other Christians who'd walked with her, and she now is, yeah, she's doing camp ministry, missions work. She's reaching out to the native population. It's really amazing the work she's doing. But that was just one little piece. But she had to message me to tell me. She's like, I just need you to know that like you were just one of those people in my journey, which was I thought was just incredible that I got the blessing of seeing that.
I
Yeah.
think that's like insane and exciting because yeah, it does away with the caricature that
Mm,
if we destigmatize doubt, then everything's going to fall apart for everyone.
yeah. Yeah.
Instead it's just like, wow, like you ministered as a doubter to someone who
Mhm.
was doubting in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly.
I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for like
Mhm.
sharing so honestly.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And again, like it's been kind of a journey of like, I'm just going to be open and kind of share what I've walked through, because you never know who's dealing with what, and you never know how much it could really speak to them in their season.